Well, it's time to get the New York Jets 2018 offseason underway as we take a look around the depth chart to see what top moves to expect in free agency and the NFL draft. Should the Jets sign Kirk Cousins? What about Jarvis Landry? Tremaine Johnson? Well, we have it all covered as Jets Uncovered on the Ourlads Football Radio Network starts now. All right, it's Wednesday, February 14th, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. Welcome to another edition of Jets Uncovered on the Ourlads Football Radio Network at ourlads.com. Joining me from RotoWire.com is sports writer Jan Levine. And Jan, you know there's nothing more satisfying than getting to witness your peers always slow behind your role, as once again they're about 4 months late with Baker Mayfield, so it's nice to see they finally caught up. Now the question is, will NFL GMs, and most especially for our sakes, Mike Maccagnan, be insightful enough to do everything in his power to get him? Or do you think Jet fans would rather spend money on Kirk Cousins? I mean, I know where we stand, but to tell you the truth, we haven't really gotten into the Kirk Cousins things too much.
I think it goes back and forth. From what I've seen, actually, ironically, supposedly there are Jet fans on Twitter who are pushing Cousins to sign with the Jets. And clearly the contract that was signed by Jimmy Garoppolo with the 49ers will play a part in terms of impacting the salary that he's going to get because of the guaranteed money, because of the quote-unquote length of the contract associated with a player that's really had a minimal number of starts. But as many have pointed out, I mean, if they franchised him, which was going to have to happen in New England for them to keep him this year, I believe they figured that the cap hit would be about $23 million. And by signing him to the longer-term deal with the guarantee, I think that hit moves up to approximately, I think, 27 to 28 million. Then also when you factor in that they front-loaded the deal, so more of that money is being paid this year and further and less down the road, which makes a better cap utilization associated when you figure that San Francisco will be a better team and maybe having to get certain players associated with it. You may have kind of a blueprint for GM Mike Maccagnan if he wants to get Cousins. And clearly this is something you and I discussed. The arguments is do you go with the relatively more known quantity, even though there are still question marks associated with Cousins' ability to lead a team forward and be the franchise guy, for lack of a better term, or do you attempt to draft your own franchise guy and make him the future face of your organization, similar to what the Jets did with Mark Sanchez? So compare and contrast Mayfield to Sanchez. Baker Mayfield has a lot more history in terms of the starting quarterback in college, played a lot more games, dealt with a lot more in terms of walking on several teams. So you know he's got the moxie that we like. You know he comes across as the face of a franchise, albeit sometimes where some people refer to him a bit more closely linked to Johnny Manziel, where the two of them are much different in terms of their interest levels and the way they kind of handle themselves either on and off the field. And then the other factor that has to be considered is, given where the Jets drafted 6 and given all of the hype associated with all of these rookie quarterbacks now, is can the Jets remain at 6 and even draft Baker Mayfield, or if they've identified that either he or Allen or Rosen or Darnold is any of those guys for the future franchise leader of this organization, do they need to package assets to move up, and are you willing to package assets? So all of this now needs to factor in to Mike Maccagnan's evaluation process in terms of the direction to go forward. Personally, in my opinion, I would much rather use the 6th pick on the offensive lineman out of Notre Dame and bring in Kirk Cousins, because I do think he can be the franchise leader of this organization. And then we'll get to it later, but I do think there's moves they can do on at least a wide receiver on the offensive line to bolster that. And we know they are going to get some cap savings, and this is something that you and I discussed previously and has been kind of confirmed today, that they will end up cutting Muhammad Wilkerson and obtaining some cap realization from cutting him now, even though it does come associated with some dead cap space.
Yeah, even though they'll have probably about $100 million after the Wilkerson move. Now you're saying that it's based on the Garoppolo contract, Cousins would approximately cost the Jets how much in cap space next year?
I'm going to guess it's probably going to be in the same range. I'm going to guess in the $27 to $28 million range.
All right, so let's round it out to 30. So
they may have to go even more associated with the guaranteed money, which is clearly the key, and then you kind of work your contract associated with the other language that you put in it.
Yeah, so let's say 30 million. This is part of the problem that I have with the deal, is that that's a third of what the Jets would have to spend, pretty much. And to me, based on this roster and Kirk Cousins' age, he will be 30 years old next year. It's too much for me. It's the Jets are not a quarterback away from winning a Super Bowl. Kirk Cousins, for where the Jets are, in my opinion, as a franchise, are not so close that by bringing a 30-year-old guy around, that we'd be able to win and compete for a Super Bowl within 2 years. And when you spend that much money on a quarterback, your hope is, and I think I speak for a lot of Jet fans, it's not just we go out there and hey, let's just win a Super Bowl. Sure, what we want to do is we'd like to have a nice little run going. Sure, we'd love a Super Bowl. We'll take that and have 20 more losing seasons. I would. But fact is, sure, let's win a Super Bowl. Let's keep winning. Let's see if we can win 2 in 7 years, that kind of thing. And I just don't see that happening with Kirk Cousins. And I think that's why I think he's better off in Denver. I think Denver's the perfect place for him. Denver, with Kirk Cousins next year, instantly becomes a major threat to win the Super Bowl as long as Cousins becomes the quarterback that they're hoping he becomes, because they already have a very good defense and they have enough talent that a quarterback like Cousins, if he succeeds, should be able to elevate that team a lot quicker than the New York Jets. So the Jets, in my opinion, you save that extra $30 million. You hold on to your pick, of course, to target for the quarterback, and you end up with a quarterback that is 7 years younger than Kirk Cousins. Now, of course, the problem is you don't know what you're going to get with the quarterback. You don't. I don't know. Baker Mayfield is the only quarterback that I feel confident will have a successful NFL career. That doesn't mean any of the other quarterbacks won't. They could. Matter of fact, they could all be better than Mayfield. It's possible. If anything's possible with all those top 4 quarterbacks that are going to be in the draft. But it's a crapshoot. We all know it, which is why the safer thing is to go with Cousins. I get that. But I just think of where the Jets are right now, and because I know they can use other talent. See, and I know that the money that Maccagnan's going to spend this offseason is going to be completely different to what he spent a few years ago, because when he was spending money and making deals a few years ago, he was bringing in guys that were all around Kirk Cousins' age or a couple years older. That's not going to happen now. So when he spends $20, $30 million, he's going to spend it on guys that are 25, 26, and 27 years old. And those are the players I want to see him spend $20, $25 million on. Go and get Tremaine Johnson. Go ahead and get Malcolm Butler. Get guys like that that, I can spread it around. I can get a couple of guys at $20 million each. And I can get maybe 4 or 5 other guys at $5 million here and $7 million there, and it won't cripple you as much if you unload a third of your contract for Kirk Cousins, which I still believe is also an unknown on whether or not he's the type of guy that can not only become the franchise quarterback with the Jets, but also handle the New York media. I know it's tough in Washington, but it ain't anywhere near as tough in New York.
No kidding. No question. Again, the media focus he's going to have here, the I would say requirements is probably a bad word, but the demands upon him, both in terms of on and off the field, are going to be much different. The expectations are going to be much more raised here, especially with the Giants in this town as well. Though, again, you can't say that Washington didn't have higher expectations given the history associated with that organization. But if he's going to come here, but the difference is that Cousins has had the expectations on him to a certain extent, so he knows to a certain extent as to what he's getting himself into.
Yeah, he can handle the pressure. He appears like he can handle the pressure.
Well, again, you got to remember, Denver also, you're going to have high expectations. You got to remember the team around him is probably considered to be a better team. They have a ton of draft picks as well. Look who their president is in terms of Elway, in terms of the history associated there. The quarterback that took them to the promised land relatively recently is Peyton Manning. You're stepping into a situation where you've had a couple of failed quarterbacks, so the expectation of you walking through that door, is going to be severely raised compared to with either Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch or any of those guys. So it's not as if he's stepping into a land of panacea and all flowers and goodliness when he walks out there. He's going to have expectations, especially given his salary point. But it depends on what he wants to do. But first of all, the question is where does Kirk Cousins want to play? And that hasn't been determined. Let's suspend belief for a certain matter and say he's definitively coming to New York, where we don't necessarily know that, right? So part of that associated with it is going to be what is the contract demands he's going to have required. And if he recognizes that the team around him could be improved by him not breaking the bank so detailed in terms of getting the max money for every single year, maybe then that has an impact associated with the amount he signs for. Personally, my opinion is, look, these guys want the guaranteed money because in the NFL, we all talked about it's called not for long for a specific reason. And as we've seen in the past, one hit and you're done, and the guaranteed money is all that matters. So he's going to go to the situation where he can make the most money, but if the money's relatively equal, he wants to go to the situation where he has the best chance to win. Right now, I would probably say that's Denver. So if the Jets want him, McCagne's going to have to sell him on his vision for the short and the longer term associated with having him as quarterback.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, too, is as far as the draft situation, it obviously completely different if the Jets were to if pick up Cousins, then they could take a look at the at the rest of the needs, including corner. Is Minkah Fitzpatrick still on the board? Doubtful that Saquon Barkley would still be on the board. You mentioned the Notre Dame offensive lineman, the kid Quentin Nelson. I will say this. I mean, look, I've said this before, and I know I heard it on one of the NFL live shows too. I forget who it was. Somebody mentioned that one of the GMs, it might have been Tony Dungy, had a rule that he never basically drafts certain players in the top 10 or something like that, and one of them are offensive linemen, and I completely agree with that. Unless it is a bona fide, can't miss, 15-year Hall of Fame left tackle, I do not draft offensive. I don't like drafting offensive linemen with the top 10. But I will say, in this draft, if the Jets are in a situation where Fitzpatrick's gone, Barkley's gone, you've taken your quarterback, and obviously by that point, Quentin Nelson's available. I would think about it. The only thing, though, is we'll know more about that as we get closer to the draft, because they could save $5 million by letting James Carpenter go. I don't know if they'll do that. The Rick Dennison move is an interesting move because they're probably going to change scheme a little bit more, and it might be the best thing to happen to James Carpenter, because I don't think anybody's expected Carpenter to play as poorly as he did last year. The Jets' offensive line was not as bad as we all expected it to be, but there were still a lot of issues there, including center. So that's going to be a decision that they would have to decide, and we would know before the draft, obviously. I doubt James Carpenter, if he doesn't get cut by the draft, would get cut after the draft. And again, because why cut him unless you're going to save $5 million and use it in free agency before the draft? And Brian Winters already has an extension, so I see where you're going with that, but hopefully a Fitzpatrick or a Barkley would be available. Now, as far as the quarterback situation, if Cousins
let me just step in there quickly
Sure.
on that one. So one thing you did talk about that I think is really important is Rick Dennison coming in. I think that's a very underrated move.
Yes.
Given the history of him as an offensive lineman and the running attack that he's been able to establish. Now,
Yes.
you have to have the backs associated to do so, but he has made offensive lines historically better. And as you pointed out, Winters and Carpenter and a lot of the guys that they had this year, I wouldn't say they underachieved, but I wouldn't say that they overachieved either. Maybe to a slight extent compared to what we were expecting, but I wouldn't say that they took a quantum leap forward. And the hope is that Dennison, based upon who they have, maybe they go get Andrew Norwell, maybe they get a couple of guys like that. In addition, maybe they change the scheme, which is hopefully so. In my opinion, you may not go for top 10 picks into offensive linemen. My two arguments against that, not all of them were top 10. Look at what Dallas did in terms of what happens when they brought in Tyron Smith, when they brought in Zach Martin and guys like that, in terms of how it dramatically changed the face of that team beyond getting obviously Zeke Elliott and getting Dak Prescott. B, look at the history lately of Notre Dame offensive linemen that have come into the league and the success that they've had. That's another reason why if the Jets did get the Notre Dame offensive lineman at 6, I wouldn't have an issue with it if you've remediated your quarterback issues elsewhere. But the one thing I will say also is if all 4 quarterbacks are off the board, do not reach for a QB there. Take the best player. If that means taking the offensive lineman there at 6, and then using your 2 second-round picks to try to move up,
no, you don't
then
have
go
to.
that route as well.
No.
Because and also you have to be careful in terms of how many assets you're doing to get the quarterback, unless you've so clearly identified that this is the guy who's by far the best out of every offensive lineman, and we're willing to quote-unquote break the bank by dealing multiple picks to get him, then Maccagnan needs to be smart given where they sit right now.
No, look, if 4 quarterbacks go before the Jets, it's simple. Whoever's available between Barkley and Fitzpatrick. That's it. It's not even a test, because if they were able to get either Barkley or Fitzpatrick at 6, it would be a home run for the Jets again. Once again, Maccagnan would hit a home run with the number 6 pick, even though it wouldn't be a quarterback, but he'd hit a home run because the Jets obviously can use a corner. Now, this will also depend, and I think that Fitzpatrick probably does not become a factor by the draft, because I'd be shocked if the Jets don't add either Tremaine Johnson or Malcolm Butler. I mean, come on. I mean, you've got Denard Wilson.
I personally think they're going to go heavy on Butler.
I mean, it makes sense. You know, Butler would like to screw the Patriots. How better to screw the Patriots than to go to the Jets and all of that? You've got Johnson, who was coached under Denard Wilson when he was an assistant there before he came to the Jets last year. Another great move by Bowles, bringing in Denard Wilson to coach the DBs. So there's a relationship there. So, yeah, I think we agree Butler or Johnson would be here. That would mean that the Jets wouldn't need to spend, the 6th overall pick on someone like Fitzpatrick. And look, if Barkley was somehow still available, getting close to the Jets too, and they didn't need a quarterback, let's just say, then do what you need to do to go get him. But if Kirk Cousins,
if Saquon Barkley was there, I'd be doing backflips to get Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, he won't be there, but yeah, I think you have to go up and trade for him. But like you said, if 4 quarterbacks are taken, then that's a different story. Especially if 4 of those quarterbacks are taken, and see, the problem is the teams ahead of the Jets. Yes, they need quarterbacks, but a lot of them also could use Barkley, and that's kind of why it's almost impossible the Jets to get Barkley. Now,
well, I agree with you, but the question becomes is, as I said, is if they go that route, right? Which quarterbacks go where, and then where does Barkley potentially slide in? Could you get him? I mean, if the Giants are so happy with Eli, I would not be shocked if they took Barkley at 2. Even though I would go with your quarterback, they could take Barkley because they definitely need a running back.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that because, see, the quarterback situation different from the running back situation, because there's no way the Jets could trade up. I'd be shocked if the Jets could trade up a spot or 2 to get Barkley, because all the other teams ahead of them, why would they want to trade that pick when they could also use Barkley? So I think now, as far as the quarterback situation, Kirk Cousins, it would be a good thing for the Jets, unless you're somebody, a Jet fan that wants Kirk Cousins. It would be a good thing for the Jets, for the Broncos to get Kirk Cousins. So if you want Baker Mayfield, if you want one of the other quarterbacks in the draft, you want Denver to get Mayfield. You don't want Arizona to get him. You want Denver to get him. And if Denver gets Kirk Cousins, then you can scratch Denver off the list. And look, I'm starting to believe more and more that the Giants might not pick the quarterback. I think they may go with Barkley. You know why? I mean, just look at this. And I know this has nothing to do with it.
It's everything they've said about Eli. It's some of the comments you've heard a little bit about Davis Webb in terms of their belief of Davis
Webb.
But when Schumer came in, and when they had the comments associated when he started, and also the stuff from John Maurer, et cetera, it kind of allows them to potentially go that route. Though, as I said, I would probably go for the quarterback in the future, unless they really truly believe that Davis Webb is the guy. And Schumer and Schumer has taken a look at the video and they're comfortable with what they've seen in terms of practice and other stuff. Then maybe they go the route, and if they do that, I think they're going to go Barkley.
A great example is just what Shermer just did in Minnesota. If Pat Shermer can make Case Keenum look like an MVP, then why can't he make Davis Webb look like an MVP? So I think that, and the fact that they might be able to get another 3 years out of Eli, why not take Barkley? Because it's not even – because, look, the bottom line, too, is that if you're just judging talent alone, Barkley's the best player in the draft. So it's not like you're reaching to get a need position. You're actually taking the best player in the draft, possibly. So I think I could see the Giants doing that. So that's why if you look at it, if the Giants go that route, if Denver signs Cousins, now all of a sudden, if the Colts feel comfortable that Luck's going to come back, now there's a lot more of an opportunity for the Jets to get one of their top two quarterbacks on the list, and they may not have to move up to get him. So no matter what, they're going to end up with a pretty good situation. But first, free agency. And by the way, on the offensive line, I think the guy they have to go after is Ryan Jensen from Baltimore. There is no way Baltimore is going to be able to outspend the Jets for Ryan Jensen. Centers don't make a lot of money anyway. But if Jensen gets like a $15 million offer from the Ravens, the Jets can just go, okay, we'll give you 20, and it won't be shirt off our backs. So Ryan Jensen, who's turned himself into a top 10 caliber center in the NFL, would be a great addition for the Jets offensive line. And you know what? If they do that, then they could spend some middle round draft picks and maybe some other kind of bargain free agents on some depth along the line. But I don't think the Jets really need to go crazy unless things kind of work out like we just talked about, where the Notre Dame offensive lineman may make some sense. But like I said, that's still something that we'll find out during free agency. And then the rest of the offense, the wide receiver position, there's still no doubt that the Jets need to get a number one. Well, I look at the board, and there's a few guys that could turn into number ones in the NFL. I think the guy that I like the most, who may be available, second, third round, is the kid Michael Gallup from Colorado State. If he's available in that area, I think he's got number one potential. I think Lazard from Iowa State has number one potential. He's also a guy that could go, third round, fourth round. So there are receivers that could become number ones down the road that you don't have to worry about, because I don't think there's that blue chip, guaranteed number one top 10 receiver. Matter of fact, I know there isn't in this year's draft. So, and there's no way the Jets would spend a first round draft pick anyway on a wide receiver right now, because they have a bunch of twos. And that's even if Robbie Anderson is no longer on this team. And they also have, of course, a couple of rookies from last year, and they get Quincy Enunwa back.
And wouldn't be shocking if they go after Jarvis Landry, which I don't have that big of a problem with because of the kind of year he's had and what he could become. So Landry could be one of those guys that they target, obviously, depending on what happens with Robbie Anderson. And we saw last year that they were able to add a couple of pieces in the draft. I mean, we saw some decent stuff from Ardarius Judith, not as good as I think both of us had hoped, but he had an injury plagued year. Chad Hansen had the same thing in terms of his injuries associated with slowing him down, at least initially. But you saw the growth last year from Robbie Anderson. You saw what Kearse did, when Jermaine Kearse did when he came over from Seattle in the Sheldon Richardson trade. We saw what Austin Seferian-Jenkins did in terms of tight end. I'm sure we're talking about him in a couple of minutes. So the Jets didn't have a true, as you said, number one, but they did have enough guys who are more number twos associated with it for them to be able to mitigate the fact that they didn't have a true number one.
Yeah, and that's fine, because as long as you have a really good quarterback, you don't necessarily need to have a stud number one. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have won championships without stud number ones. Matter of fact, that both running back and wide receiver in the NFL for years. So it's not a complete necessity. Just have a lot of solid talent around you, a bunch of those guys, and that is even without Robbie Anderson. And by the way, I know that since the last time we spoke, Robbie Anderson got arrested again. So I told you how I felt before the season started, and I told you how I felt several times during the season with his antics. And so you know how I feel on the subject. I'm sorry, but this is enough. Okay, I don't know what's going. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but whatever has happened, it's not working. It's not getting through to him, and I don't think it's fair to the rest of the team. And something, whatever they do, I hope they make the right decision. But that's it. I mean, if they hold on to him and give him a second chance, it better be one more incident, and you are gone within 5 seconds.
That's how it works in the NFL. So, I mean, we've seen that, teams can survive without a true number one. We've seen that teams can survive with an amalgamation of receivers. I personally would like Jarvis Landry here. I don't get the impression that he would be a locker room cancer. I don't get the impression that he would be a big issue. He is a guy you could view more as not a number one, but if let's say a 1A or a 1B kind of maybe what the Jets had with Eric Decker a couple of years ago, and then you mix him in with the other guys that they have, and you especially if depending on what you do with tight end, and you've improved your positioning, especially where you don't know the downside risk, what's going to happen with Robbie Anderson.
And I think the tight end situation is easy. I mean, there's no way that Austin Seferian-Jenkins ain't coming back. I mean, he changed his life. He was a model player. He was. I actually was very impressed with him. I mean, there were two players that I was most impressed with this past season, in the locker room after games and as a leader, and that was Jenkins and Demario Davis. So I think Jenkins is back. There's no way the Jets can't afford him. Nobody's going to give him a lot of money, so they'll be able to bring him back. Leggett gets his second chance after being hurt. So, okay, if you want to go out, somewhere in the middle rounds and grab another tight end, that's fine because they got Leggett in the 5th round. That was kind of a bargain. So you want to go out and get another bargain tight end in the 5th round. I'm okay with that. But I think the Jets are pretty good there. But, yeah, they got to add another guy because as we saw last year, when Leggett went down, they had to play too much of guys like, Tomlinson and so forth. And you have to have a little bit more depth at that position. But Jenkins will be back.
I hope so. I mean, I think the issue with him, and I use the term issue not necessarily as a bad thing, but more so one of the things that has to be determined is the length of the contract and the dollars. I think the Jets might have offered, let's say, 2.8 or 2.9. He may want something like 3 years and more money, and it depends on how much upfront money or guaranteed money. So all of those have to be factored in. And then you also look at the year that he had really good that first half to first 2/3 of the year and then declined fairly dramatically in the last third. Now, part of that was impacted by who was playing quarterback and the loss of Josh McCown, but McCown, he didn't necessarily connect as well towards the latter part of McCown's tenure before he was injured. So I think that has to be factored in as well. So I do want ASJ back. I do think he has to work on his blocking. I think he has to work a little bit still even more on his conditioning. And I will give him a little bit of a pass because this was really his true first full year in several seasons because of the issues that he dealt with and really much more important issues than what took place on a football field.
Yeah, I think that I think you look at the season that he had, and even though he broke all sorts of career records from receiving with receptions and yards and stuff, fact is he wasn't a difference maker player at that spot, which he can be. I don't know if that's Josh McCown. I don't know if that's John Morton. Probably more Morton. But still, I would expect that, he can be more because the guy averaged less than 8 yards a catch. That just can't happen. That was a career low for him. So I would expect a lot more from him. And that's also part of the reason why I don't think it's going to cost the Jets a whole lot. As far as the defense is concerned, by the way, quickly with the running back position, we can dream about Barkley, but that's probably not going to happen. Fact is, I still think the Jets are fine. They don't have to do anything crazy about Barkley because we both are very big fans of Bilal Powell. The one definite move that has to be made, and it must be made, is to get rid of Matt Forte. They've got to get rid of him. I don't think he's a cancer, and they only save a couple $1 million, but he takes touches away from Powell and McGuire, and that can't happen. Bilal Powell was the clear number one on the team last year. He had 5 rushes? 5 rushes? No, 7 rushes or 9 rushes over 20 yards. 9 over 20, I think, with that 75-yard touchdown, a couple of 50-yard runs. That's explosiveness that you don't get from Forte, and you can't take that away from Powell or McGuire. So they have to get rid of Forte and then go ahead in the 3rd or 4th round. There's a bunch of good running backs every year in the draft, in that section. Get a guy like Justin Jackson from Northwestern, who will be a 4th round pick. Bring in a kid like that. Put him with both Powell and McGuire, and I think the Jets running back situation is fine.
Yeah, like using a draft pick on the second day like they did last year with McGuire to augment that. But I do agree with you that Forte has to go mainly because he is taking away touches. I mean, we talked a lot about making Powell the bell cow back and giving him the opportunity to really be the leader of the whatever kind of backfield committee that they have, and interspicing McGuire without heaping too much on his plate. But Powell also has shown that he can be a decent pass blocker when necessary. He's good in screens. So to me, he's the guy that they should be targeting to be the main back, supplemented by McGuire and whoever else they draft this year. Maybe kind of a speed or a stretch back. And I know a lot of it was talked about during the playoffs, but boy, how much do we wish that Maccagnan had traded up last year and gotten Alvin Kamara like he talked about.
All right, on defense, the situation with Wilkerson is going to open up a spot there, but do the Jets fill that by simply bringing back a couple of free agents that shouldn't cost them a lot of money, and that's Coney Ealy and David Bass? And I say yes. Bring back those guys. You don't have to spend a lot of money up front on a 3-4 defense. maybe sign another veteran player or draft another player in the 4th round or something like that. That's fine. You've already got, most of those guys did well. Leonard Williams is still a stud. We talked a lot late in the season about what a good job Xavier Cooper did when he came in. McClendon had a nice season. I think in general, the Jets defensive line, even without Wilkerson, is going to be just fine. Meanwhile, once again, the Jets are going to have to find themselves a pass rusher at linebacker, and then hope that Darren Lee, gets better. But they definitely bring back Demario Davis. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear they bring back Davis, and I think Davis has expressed that he wants to be back. I don't think that comes as any shock. As we talked about, Wilkerson will be gone. I could see any one of the guys like Pennell or Ely or some of the guys like that being brought back, although Ely didn't necessarily have put his best foot forward towards the end of the year. He kind of struggled as the year went on after a big start. I know the rumors we talked a little bit about Sheldon Richardson being a guy that they want to bring back. And while his numbers weren't great, you look at the amount of pressures that he created in Seattle, and part of that could have been the depth around him. But that could be a kind of guy that they maybe express interest in bringing back, because it seemed as if, despite all the things that swirled around him, he did enjoy being here in New York and did want to be back in New York. I do see them potentially drafting a guy, I don't think first day or second day, but maybe on the Saturday draft when they go into rounds 4 through 7, is maybe getting a outside pass rusher, either a linebacker or a defensive lineman to kind of supplement, because the issue has been, even when they had those good years when they were playing either a 3-4, 4-3, is they lacked that outside pass rushing threat. But as you mentioned, Darren Lee, I thought, took some strides last year. I think he has a lot more to go. But if you have him and you have Davis and you have two pretty darn good linebackers there, then if you had another guy, and if you go with a 4-3 or 3-4, depending on how you configure your alignment, if you get one more guy in the draft and maybe bring back a Richardson or somebody of that ilk, even though you're going to lose Wilkerson, with the amount of pressures that Leonard Williams got last year, you should hopefully have a fairly decent front 7 and have to work just a little bit more on the back line.
Yeah, and they're probably going to have to get that guy in the draft, because those players are just not available. Teams do not give up big-time pass rush talents. So you're going to have to find it in the draft, and I'm sure that's where they're going to have to do that. And then the secondary, again, as we said, it's going to be about going after Tremaine Johnson, Malcolm Butler. Other than that, I think they're fine. They've got their safeties. They re-signed Claiborne. That's another no-brainer. He's coming back. There's no question about that. And then, you know what? Buster Skrine played really well at the end of the season. Again, I think Denard Wilson probably had something to do with that. So I think the Jets are fine. There's a lot of depth in that secondary, a lot of youth in that secondary. And that's why Denard Wilson is a key guy to make sure that those kids continue to grow. And all they have to do, in my opinion, is go out, get Johnson and Butler. And I think they'll be okay back there after they re-sign Claiborne.
I agree with you. I think the first key is bringing back Claiborne, and I wouldn't overpay him because of his injury history, and he was good last year, but did kind of wear down a little bit because he didn't have his first full season. I could see also the Jets some rumors of Kyle Fuller being the guy who just went over in the trade for Alex Smith, and still be a free agent. Tremaine Johnson, as you mentioned, a guy they're going to go after, but I think the two guys is Claiborne and Butler as kind of 1A and 1B in terms of who they target. If they get both of those to go along with Adams and May in the back, and then maybe bring back Skrine, and maybe get one more depth guy to be back there, all of a sudden you've taken what was a potential strength and made it into a real strength going into next season with a revamped front 7 in front of it.
All right, and of course they also have to bring back Cannizzaro. I'm sure they will. He had a good enough season where he definitely should return, and I'm sure that's what will happen. All right, Jan, so we've got a lot more to cover from now through free agency and the draft. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks as we get closer, when we're just days away from free agency. And once that happens, when the free agency window begins, we'll be back to talk about all the rumors and everything else that takes place regarding the Jets. And then after that, it's on to the draft. So, Jan, appreciate it. And AirJan23, that's your Twitter handle, correct?
Correct.
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Care.
All right. That's Jan Levine, rotowire.com. And again, AirJan23. That's the handle on Twitter to follow Jan. And if you're a Jet fan, that's also a Ranger fan, New York Ranger fan. Well, so is Jan. Of course, if you've listened to this network enough, you know that Jan also contributes with our hockey coverage, being a Ranger guy and writes for rotowire.com for a bunch of different things, including covering hockey, the Rangers, and so forth. All right, so look, the New York Jet offseason report, by the way, is going to be available at ourlads.com later today. Matter of fact, I should be able to post that no later than early tomorrow. So I'm just putting the finishing touches on the report. If you've gone to ourlads.com since the end of the season, you might notice that I've had, I think, 4 or 5 reports up there already. Where we at? We have the Giants, the Browns, the Bucks. Is that it? Giants, Browns, Bucks. I think there's another team. And then, of course, I'll have the Jets. I was going to do the Colts, but I wanted to wait until they made a hire. And now that they have, I'll move into the Colts after the Jets. So the Jets will be posted. So the information is going to be available. A lot from what we just talked about here on the show and much more for the New York Jets offseason report that will be posted at ourlads.com. And that'll fill you in with the key free agents that are available. I've mentioned some of them already. I think actually I've mentioned them all. By the way, Wesley Johnson's a free agent, and I'd be shocked. I mean, I guess the Jets can bring him back, pay him like a couple of $1 million to be the backup, center. That wouldn't be a surprise. But look, there's no way Wesley Johnson is starting at center for the Jets next year. So really, we've covered all the main free agents. Now, Josh McCown. Look, it's all about Kirk Cousins. Okay, if Kirk Cousins is signed, Josh McCown probably won't be. I mean, I guess he could be. Theoretically, you still need a backup. I doubt the Jets would, at that point, just hand the keys over to Hackenberg or Petty as the backup. I don't see that happening. So I guess they couldn't bring McCown back as a backup. But then again, if you're spending as much money on Cousins as they probably would have to, McCown's going to make a decent amount of money. He's not going to make a lot, anything like crazy. But he's, I don't know if the Jets want to spend that much on a backup. They might want to save some money there. So if McCown wants to play, he may have to go somewhere else. I don't know. That's again. I'm not going to say that if the Jets go after Kirk Cousins or if the Jets draft Sam Darnold, that I'm going to be upset. It's just they're not the top of my list. Those are the guys that are on the bottom of my list. But it's the list of players that I'm okay with. It starts, as you know, with Baker Mayfield, and it has since October. So it's Baker Mayfield 1. Then I probably would have to go to, it's tough. I might go to Josh Allen. 2, Josh Rosen 3, and then I would go to, it's tough. I might go to Darnold 4 over Cousins. And the reason is like I said, 30 years old, man, it's old. And I know it's not old in the sense that he's not in the prime of his career, because he is. But he's old, as I said, in the sense because the Jets are in rebuild mode. And I'm sorry, I just don't think you rebuild by spending $30 million a year on a 30-year-old quarterback. That hasn't proven anything in the postseason. So I don't think that's the way to go. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. And we'll talk more about that, though, of course, before free agency. So we will be on the air. We'll have tons of rumors about what's going on. And maybe by the time we come back on the air, I get the sense that we probably would know a week before free agency kicks off where Kirk Cousins is going. I get that sense. I get the sense that a news report will come out about a week or 10 days before free agency begins, and the rumors will say Kirk Cousins is going to probably sign here. That's what I guess is going to happen, but we'll see. All right, and also in the report, we went over a few of the. Actually, we go in detail, position by position, about how the players played last year and what to expect moving forward need-wise for the Jets in either free agency or the draft. So, again, that is the Jets report available at ourlads.com, coming up either later today or definitely no later than tomorrow early, because I will be tweeting out a promo on that it's available, and that this show is available on demand at probably early tomorrow afternoon, like between 12 and 3. All right, so there you go. Thanks again for checking back with us here on Jets Uncovered with Jan Levine. And we have tons of draft coverage, by the way, as well. Dan Shonka from Our Lads is going to be talking draft, NFL draft with us starting next Wednesday and every Wednesday until the draft. So it's going to be Wednesdays at what time? 2 Eastern. All right, so every Wednesday at 2 Eastern starting next Wednesday, and that is the 21st. Dan Shonka is going to join me for the Our Lads Guide to the 2018 NFL Draft shows. And that is, it's going to give us an opportunity, first of all, next week to preview the Combine, which is in a couple of weeks. And then once the Combine's over, we are going to go, position by position. We're going to have Dan's take on rankings, draft status, and then we'll also be tapping into mock drafts. So we're not going to do. That's why we've always said this. We're not doing mock drafts until after the Combine. So we'll have a mock draft coming up real soon in a few weeks after the Combine. We'll have probably 2 mock drafts. That's usually what we do. We usually have one right after the Combine and one right after the draft. One right before the draft, about a week before the draft. So that's coming up on the Our Lads Guide to the 2018 NFL Draft starting next Wednesday and every Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern here on the Our Lads Football Radio Network. So for Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget also to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. We'll see you next time on Jets Uncovered.